Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, especially from so far, many of you. And we're really delighted to have you here. My name's Judy Coffin. I am one of the co-hosts of French Presse, which is run by the Society for French Historical Studies. And since we have a very full agenda for the next hour, I am simply going to welcome you and pass it over to our other co-host and the wonderful leader of the Society for French Historical Studies, Tabitha Ewing. Over to you, Tabitha.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judy. Normally, Sally Charnal would be here as the co-organizer of French Presse, which is a platform that the Society uses to do all kinds of very cool things like introduce new books and so on. I wanted to say first and foremost that this is exceptionally organized as not just through the Society for French Historical Studies, but co-sponsored by Africa as a Country, which is fantastic, and generously sponsored by the Center for Civic Engagement at Bard College, the Center for Human Rights and the Arts at Bard College, French Studies, the French Studies Program, Historical Studies Program, Human Rights Project, Office of the Dean of the College, and the Science, Technology, and Society Program, all at Bard College. And one of the reasons why I wanted Bard's co-sponsorship was because we on our campus, where I am professor, have not had a whole lot recognizing the rather earth-shattering events that have been taking place on the continent in the last, I'd say, 15 months. And so just this one particular, very specific history that links the interests of French historians, those who are interested in the history of France, Francophone world, and especially what we might call beyond France. And there, as with the guest who I'm about to introduce, I'm particularly interested in the oblique relationships that an intervention by way of French history allows, right? So that it isn't necessarily repeating imperial histories such as they've already been told for a century or more, but rather using French history as, in this case, a little bit more than heuristically, but nevertheless as a way for us to think intellectually and to be engaged with the world as it is on the ground through lived experience, not necessarily centering France, but allowing for France to open up possibilities of, or sight lines that might not otherwise be there. So I'm particularly thrilled to have Karina Ray, who is, and I'm going to read here because this is a recent position, AM and HP Bentley Chair in African History and Associate Professor at the Great University of Michigan. You may already know her book, Crossing the Color Line, Race, Sex, and the Cultural Politics of Colonialism in Ghana. And also has a co-edited volume that I don't want us to forget called Darfur and the Crisis of Governance in Sudan, a critical reader. And so important for us to think about that right now. Karina is also series editor of New African Histories with the Ohio University Press and with African Identities, Past and Present with Cambridge University Press, and Ohio Short Stories of Africa with Ohio University Press. So Karina, please, I'm going to turn it over to you, and hopefully you'll introduce us to our other wonderful guest.
Yes, thank you so much, Tabitha, and thanks so much for the invitation to be here with all of you today. I'm really grateful, and any opportunity to hang out with you, Tabitha, and with Idrisu is always very welcome. And I'm really delighted to be able to introduce Idrisu Mourakapai, who is a Beninois filmmaker whose award-winning body of socially relevant and artistically compelling work tells the stories of people who are underrepresented in mainstream productions. His filmography includes the documentary features Sigeti Key, The Queen Mother, 2002, Arlit, The Second Paris, which we're here to discuss today, 2005, Indochina, Traces of a Mother from 2011, and America Street, 2019. And just because of the crowd that's gathered here today, I want to also flag everybody's attention to the film I just mentioned, Indochina or Indochine Traces of a Mother from 2011. This is a really important and brilliant film that looks at the intimate relationships that formed between Beninois soldiers conscripted into the French colonial army to put down the anti-colonial resistance in Vietnam. So while it's sort of centered within this kind of colonial and anti-colonial moment, it does something very unusual when we think about sort of interracial relationships in the context of colonialism, which is to center those which form between colonial subjects that are in many ways set against one another, and yet nonetheless end up forming these relationships, and traces the search of one of the children of these unions who's sent back to Benin with his father and goes back to Vietnam as an adult looking for traces of his mother. And it's just so powerful. So I really encourage you all to check that out. So Idrissou's films have been screened in prestigious film festivals in Berlin, Rotterdam, Vienna, Milan, Busan, Marseille, Sheffield, and many other places. His work has garnered numerous international accolades, including the TV Best Documentary Award in Belgium, the Best Documentary Award from the 15th African, Asian, and Latin American Film Festival in Italy, the Amiens Metropole Award from France, and he's also the recipient of the 2013 Prince Claus Award. Idrissou is an assistant professor in the Department of Media Studies, Media Arts, Sciences, and Studies at Ithaca College, where he teaches film production. Most recently, he's the Okwi Nwezor Fellow at the Africa Institute in Sharjah, UAE, where he joins us from now, and the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, which is supporting his ongoing work on Border Life, a feature-length creative documentary on Seme, a bustling border town between Nigeria and Benin, where the lives of peddlers, smugglers, travelers, and ordinary citizens are deeply intertwined in ways that open up a window into the localization of global economic exchanges. And here I just want to shift a little bit in this introduction to talk about how I've sort of, in a way, grown with Idrissou's films, which have been indispensable to the work that I do in the classroom teaching African history and other related subjects. Just like those few books and articles that I return to semester after semester because of their unmatched pedagogical value, his films allow my students to critically engage Africa's past and presence with nuance and compassion. The added value of his impressive body of cinematographic work is that the medium itself grabs students' attention and imagination in novel ways that allows them to access the sights and sounds of African life and to develop an appreciation for the women and men who he renders with such clarity and grace in his films. In 2012, I taught Arlit II Paris for the first time as part of a fully integrated service learning course called The African City, Urban History and the Making of the Global African World. The course explored the histories of a range of African and African diaspora cities, and I wanted to include case studies that would expand a student's vision of what constitutes a city. Arlit, the film and city, is as stunning as it is sparse, and all of you who've already watched the film will understand that description. Once a city bustling from the profits of the uranium trade, its fortunes went into steep decline in the 1990s after the price of uranium plummeted. Idrissou picks up Arlit's story just at the point when most people had forgotten about it. Viewers are confronted with the devastating effects of predatory mining and environmental degradation, including their epidemiological consequences in Niger. The enduring colonial model of resource extraction, coupled with the machinations of neo-colonial exploitation, are on full display to see. But Morakapai, Idrissou, is also interested in understanding how Africans have remade Arlit in the wake of its increasing irrelevance to European economies and geopolitical interests. To this end, the film opens a painful dialogue about the perils of migration across the Sahara and about those who languish or who are lost along the way. No longer fueled by uranium boom, Arlit is now an important node in the expansive human trafficking networks that annually move hundreds of thousands of Africans across the Sahara. Idrissou's film vividly brings to life what one leg of that dangerous yet increasingly ubiquitous journey looks like and sounds like, set against the ghostly backdrop of Arlit's vanquished glory. As a generous and invested artist, Idrisu readily accepted my invitation to screen the film at Fordham back in 2012. In the conversation that ensued with my students, he revealed that he himself had passed through Arlit as he made the perilous journey from his home in northern Benin across the Sahara to Algeria and then across the Mediterranean to southern Italy before making his way to Germany, where he later attended film school. This piece of biographical information made a powerful impression on my students, blowing open new ways of understanding the film that they had just watched, and challenging them to think in more critical ways about the process of migration itself. In this way, the film had an unexpected impact on my students who were then working at the Mid-Manhattan Adult Learning Center in Harlem with African immigrants who were seeking conversational fluency in English. It opened their eyes to the many and varied circumstances that their conversation partners might have faced during their own migration processes, subjects that, for obvious reasons, their partners usually refrained from discussing. And finally, as we fast forward to 2023, there is ample media coverage of the migration crisis and its impact on Africans, among many others. But in 2005, when Arlit debuted, this was not the case. Idrisu truly broke new ground with this film. I continue to teach Arlit not just in the African city, but also in my many other African history courses, where it helps me to explore themes related to colonial and post-colonial extractive economies, neocolonialism, the environment, and of course, migration. All of these themes are once again at the forefront of current events in Niger in the wake of the 2023 military coup, which removed President Mohamed Bazoum from power at a moment when Niger's dwindling uranium supply has a renewed importance to France's ability to sustain its dependence on nuclear power in the face of the Russian-Ukraine war and its implications for France's ability to rely on Russian uranium. So with all of that in view, I turn it over to Idrisu Morakapai. Idrisu.
Wow, thank you so much for this generous introduction. I really appreciate. And I deeply also appreciate your initiative in fostering this important discussion. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of it. Although I should feel honored that my film, almost 2 decades since its making, is still relevant. It's also somewhat depressing. I would have hoped that the issues addressed there would have been improved by now. Alas, that is not the case. I first visited Arlit in the 80s, as Karina mentioned, on my way to Europe via North Africa. And back then, I witnessed the economic boom nostalgically depicted by the characters in the film, which had left a lasting impression on me during that period. However, what truly propelled me to create this film was when I met Issa, my character, during my trip back home. Issa had hosted me during my stopover in Arlit in the 80s, and now lived in our village after his retirement. His shocking stories about the causes of his illness and the tragic death of his friends, his portrayal of a town in decline, of an abandoned population, and of a migrants passing through the town on their journey to Europe. It all triggered my interest in exploring this place for a documentary project. When I returned to shoot the film, I was armed with a clear vision. While the investigative aspect was crucial, my primary focus was on crafting a cinematically compelling narrative. I wanted to find a camera language that could visually, even without text, capture these 2 key aspects of life in Arlit. On the one hand, the contamination that slowly ate up workers' bodies. On the other hand, the waiting, the void, and the isolation in this beautiful but also overpowering environment of the Sahara. So how can you visually show the feeling of suffocation and being trapped within a natural landscape that invoke infinity of space, but also threaten to kill you? During the shooting, my team had to deal with suspicion and fear of local authorities, who presume our presence was related to scrutinize workers' condition and contamination. Our equipment was confiscated on the first day. And we were summoned to explain the theme subject, where I try to present a more general and innocuous interest in Arlit history. Even though we were allowed to film, tension persisted until the end of the filming, prompting me to take precautions to safeguard our tapes at departure. This experience, it's of course not unique. African state officials often view documentary filmmakers with suspicion, as our work is perceived as being against the interests of the country. In Niger, this skepticism was notably more pronounced in my case, given the crucial role of uranium. So to give you some figures, uranium constitutes 32% of the country's export, but shockingly only contribute to 5% of the national budget. Areva, the French company of which the state holds almost half of the share, had in 2013 a global revenue of 13 billion, which was twice the worth of Niger's entire economy. So to come back to my experience during the shooting, the authorities mistrust on the score of the awareness of malpractices in uranium extraction. Local officials from Areva knew that in other contexts that they could be charged of criminal neglect, but have shows silence due to self-interest, enjoying substantial salary while neglecting the welfare of the people and the economic well-being of the country. So during the shoot, I even uncovered the active deception practices by local doctors who lied about illness linked to radioactive contamination. What is curious is the fact that my entire team were given protective suits, but the workers we were filming did not wear any, as you can see in the scene in the underground mine. Furthermore, in Arlit, I was always struck by the company's paternalistic discourse that claimed to be in Niger for altruistic reasons, while the true profit came from uranium mines in Canada or Kazakhstan. French nationals I met there repeated same narrative of assistance, asserting that without Areva, Arlit and the country itself would face a disaster. So Areva's attitude in Niger was in some ways replicated by French mainstream media reception of my film that was hesitant to take up the claim I made in this film. It was important to mention that in France, there's a large consensus about the role of nuclear energy. This prevailing sentiment has contributed to a reluctance in the media to critique the practices of uranium mining in general, unless the issue directly affected French workers. For instance, following the closure of the Limousin uranium mining, that's in the southern part of France, workers who developed cancer because of the mining activity successfully sued the government. However, a similarly legal recourse has not been possible for workers in Niger. In France, it was especially festivals run by anti-globalization and anti-nuclear activists that pushed a debate of the film into different cycles. French mainstream festivals were more hesitant to screen our lead. Nonetheless, following successful pressure from those activists, Areva hastily provided protective equipment and funded some projects in Niger. Still, these initiatives are nothing compared to the company's colossal annual profit. I also want to remind the several name change through which the company tried to rebrand itself. During the shoot, the company operated under the name Kojima, and subsequently it became Areva, and in 2018, the company changed once again and is presently known as Uranium. So Urano or Areva had several opportunities to rectify its mistake and shift, away from this neo-colonial or exploitation practice by embracing a policy of equal exchange. But unfortunately, they failed to seize this opportunity. So the recent political upheavals in West Africa, particularly Niger, did not surprise me. It was evident that the people would support any coup that would overthrow the corrupt government. So for now, I want to stay here, and so we can open the debate. A question in case you have some. Karina, to you.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that background. And in fact, you sort of anticipated what my first question was going to be, which was to just talk a little bit about how your own experience passing through, Arlit set the stage for the subsequent film that you did. And so you've really already done that so well. So thank you for that. But I just think it's really, important to acknowledge that connection with the Beninois people that you encountered there was really important, and in a way that I think for me what's so powerful about this film is the way that it brings these two really critical issues into connection with one another. That is this question of the uranium mining and the rise of Arlit's importance as this hub in these trans-Saharan migration networks. And one of the things that I found really actually quite fascinating to think about, so you were making the film in the early 2000s. It comes out in 2005. Is the way in which, in some ways, the depiction of the human trafficking networks is deeply humanized. We understand it in a way that I don't think sort of the way that it's captured in today's representations in the media would seem familiar, right? The representation today is of an industry that is predatory, that is parasitic, that brings out the very worst in human beings who are attempting to make a profit off of the desperation of other people. But in the film, you have, I think, around between the 20 and 25 minutes into the film, a sequence of interviews with migrants themselves who are talking about the desperation that is sending them across the Sahara, but also with the Tuareg men who smuggle the migrants across the desert. And then with Amadou, the Beninois mechanic who fixes these cars. And one of the things that's so amazing is just how interdependent these people are in this town. And it's not this depiction of the parasitic or predatory relations that we tend to think of. What comes out actually as the predatory industry in this town is the remnants of the uranium mining that still continue, right? Even as it's no longer kind of creating the profits. And so I just wanted to maybe start off by asking you to talk about the tension between these two industries, if you will, that that sustain our elite's economy and social fabric in the early 2000s. And, you know, to my mind, one of the questions that I kept on thinking about, as you know, as my mind has been so saturated with much more recent depictions of the inhumanity of human trafficking across the Sahara and the Mediterranean,
Yeah.
is whether something, to your mind, has fundamentally changed in how human trafficking is conducted, or whether or not there's just an aspect of it that it may be inhumane, you know, but there's an aspect of its humanity in the interpersonal relations and dependency that develop in a place like Arlit that we just don't see anymore, because the human toll is so grave, and all we can think about and do is mourn all of those who perish in the Mediterranean Sea. So that's my first question. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, nothing had changed actually, apart from what Europe is trying to do, how the policy, it's a European policy to try to stop them, while using North African countries, for instance, right? And as a new border, European border, right? So that's not a shame. But the human flow from Africa, from the south, from the places and countries in the south of the Sahara, through still continue. I mean, if you go to Niger, we still see a lot of people. You know, I don't know if you get to know that Niger now changed the policy. You know, they refuse now to be part of this movement that Europe is funding them, is funding Niger, you know, to stop, you know, to arrest and send the migrants back home. That's what they refuse. Even, you know, at the time I was filming, that happened too, right? So some Africans got arrested. In my case, for instance, when I finished my shoot, I've been given 2 Togolese in my car to take them to Benin because they got kicked out of the country. That happened too, but at the same time, so many people were, waiting in Arlit or in Agadez, you know, for a trip to a place, to the north. What actually also struck me when I came to Arlit is how close, how connected these cases were, but at the same time, they were so disconnected, right? Migration, and then the exploitation of the mines. You know, how few the people knew about the minings, even for those who were living there, or even the Tuaregs. How few they know about the mines, for instance, about all the situation and describing in the film, the illnesses, even the economic aspect of the exploitation, because they were not involved in it, right? At the same time, when you see it from the global, you know, perspective, you see how close, how connected, interconnected. African youth are moving outside of Africa. They are going to try their chance elsewhere because of the lack of opportunities in Africa. So at the same time, you have big companies, multinational, that making profit in this country, exploiting, you know, without using African youth, right? And the few that work there, you know, is those who got sick, right? So that's, it's also, myself as a filmmaker, yeah, that's, I started with the destiny of my character, but when I came and on the ground, on the location, I noticed that the story was way more than what I previously imagined, right? For instance, this migration, the tragic story, aspect of the film, I wasn't prepared of, right? As a documentary filmmaker, you know, don't limit it yourself on your treatment or what you have previously, but be open, stay open, and take anything that come open up to you. So that's what I did in this film. So how I met these young Africans desperate and trying to reach Europe. And at the same time, I mean, I know because I took this way too, that this trip it doesn't guarantee anything for them, but you cannot tell them. You have no other solution. You cannot say go home for where, to do what, right? So that was really my my feeling. So today you still observe the same situation in the Sahara. The only thing that's changed, you have way more people dying, dying because of the policy in Europe, European policy in the North Africa, that pay them to send back Africans, young Africans, to where the desert, and most of them die there, right? Because way back home, it's a dangerous trip, right? So that has to change. That wasn't, the case when I was filming there.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I want to, before I ask you the next question, to just underscore about something you said at the beginning of comments is that, the thing about uranium is not that it's not being mined anymore there, right? It continues to be mined, but because it no longer fetches the prices that it used to, it doesn't have the kind of economic benefit to Arlit itself, right? It doesn't mean that it doesn't sort of benefit France and its dependence on nuclear energy, right? And so there's that tension there, which I think also helps to explain the kind of one of the roots of the anti-colonial sentiment that we see being articulated so clearly in, for instance, the 2023 coup and the public support for it, right? This kind of sense that Bazoum and his regime were kind of, really in bed with France and with French interests, both as it relates to sort of not just France, but sort of like Western interest in in all of this kind of quote unquote counterterrorism work that they're doing in the Sahel, and as Mali and as Burkina Faso sort of broke away from that, there was this renewed importance placed on Niger, and sort of the coup and its refusal of those kinds of relationships was really, I think, advancing this critique of neo-colonial relations. And again, it's sort of, one begins to look at the much longer history of that sentiment in your film, right? Because that's what people who are articulating when they look at what have been the repercussions of this dependence on uranium for them, right? It's no longer enriching them. It no longer has any positive net benefits. It only accrues sort of outside. And so I think that that's something that's really important to just articulate. The question that I just, before I throw it open to everybody else, that I think one of the parts of the films that was emotionally kind of really moving for me is the two sequences of interviews that you have with the two Togolese women in the bar. And there's so much going on, this, they're there, they're working, there are no drinks to be served. Literally the only other person besides the two women and you, or the only other living thing in the bar, is this bird, that we see flying around, landing on the fan that doesn't work. And so it's interesting for me because apart from those two women and another woman that you see in an earlier sequence in an alleyway. She doesn't speak, but she's with a group of men who are migrants, right? So we see her. So those are the only other those three are the like migrant women who surface in the film. And at one point, the one of the women in the bar who's sitting there, and she's just, she doesn't like move at all. Like she's got her face perched up on the bar and she's so still in her body. And it's obvious that she's not going to be she can't survive off of the work she's doing there. She hasn't been able, there's no drinks to sell. And she says, well, you ask her, well, how do you survive? And she said, well, I have my means of survival. So the subtext there is this question of prostitution, right? And for her own reasons of just dignity and pride, she's not going to articulate that directly, but she's saying it in not so many words.
Yeah.
And so that's there in the film as a kind of quiet but very powerful presence that you can't escape. And I just wanted to just maybe hear a little bit about what those conversations in that bar were like for you, and the series of questions that you asked the two women, and especially thinking about sort of like your larger body of film work, Sigeti, Indochine Traces of a Mother, which have really been, centrally concerned with women. I wonder, like, obviously you made an intentional choice to bring these women into the film, but they don't have the kind of prominence that women have in your other films. So just to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's thank you. That's the interesting question. I've been reproached for my question to these women. I wasn't aware at all that my question will appear in this way. That I did not understand that my question or her reply, response to my question, reveals anything like like a prostitution. I did not imagine this way at all when I shot it. And that came, to me, I first became aware of that after the screening of the film, when somebody in the audience asked me, say, what do you expected, for her to reply? I say, I want to know. I was curious. I want to know how. I say, yeah, that's evident. I say, what is evident? It's enough. Yeah, it's evident she's doing something. I say, what? So I did not understand at all. It's an aspect of her life I did not imagine at all. So how do I met? Actually, what you said is true, that I wanted to have also some women as character in the film. But in a place like Arlit, it wasn't easy to find women's perspective. Women are all at home. You don't meet them. You don't see them, right? It's also the culture. It's like a culture. It's a culture in the place. I have to respect it. I cannot enter into the family house and meet with women. So I accidentally met these women because the place I met them is the place where when we take our break, I like to say it's very hot. When I was shooting, it was 52 degrees. So Celsius, 52. That means after 12, you cannot go out. So we were looking for a place to rest. And then we've been shown this place, and we didn't know what was the place. And then the first day we've been there, nothing happened. There was nobody there. It was open. And the second day, these two women were sitting there. So we were trying to buy some drinks, and there were no drinks. To eat anything is not. And I called one of these women. I say, where are you from? I asked them where they were coming from. we actually, I mean, they were from Togo, I'm from Benin, so we are kind of cultural things that actually bound us. We started talking about where we come from, the culture. I mean, it's very close. Benin and Togo, there's no difference. That's how the conversation actually started. Right. And then when we started, I called my cameraman and I said, that's interesting. That could be the character I'm looking for. That could be, this, female characters I'm looking for. And we started shooting the conversation. But the problem was that they just reply with one sentence. When you ask the question, they don't talk too much, just one sentence. So for a filmmaker, it's very difficult when you have characters, you have that doesn't talk. It just pump, go just one sentence, boom, and then wait and take. So it was difficult because I filmed a lot. I filmed them a lot, but you cannot do a lot with the material, because if you ask a question as a filmmaker and the person said, yeah, so you cannot do nothing with yeah or no. Right, so many of what they said was like that. So that make that 90% of what I did, what I recorded actually many days. I couldn't do anything with that. So the few I could capture, where I imagine that can be part of the film, is what you have seen in the film, right? So that's it's really a difficult part of our lead, because I was very, especially after the screening, after the, show my audience, show this aspect of what I was trying. I mean, what they imagine I was trying to show to my audience, which wasn't my intention at all, right? To show them a prostitute. They are respectable, women, with family at home. They left their families at home. The only thing they did is that, they came late. They came 20 years late to early to the place, and they were stuck there and they didn't know how to go, So, and I even helped them, at the end. That wasn't part of the film, I'm giving them money to say, if you want to go home, take some money. I know they didn't want to go home, that, they would keep the money, right? So that's actually the story behind this way.
Yeah, I mean, what you captured, I mean, it sounds like you had a lot of footage and you only used just a teeny amount, but the amount that you did use was really incredibly powerful. And just to say, I don't think that you rendered them in any way, shape, or form as prostitutes. Not at all. That wasn't what I meant to suggest. I mean, they are dignified, right? I mean, they're in their comportment, their dress, the way that they speak, everything. It's just that one small line that clues you into the real deep complexity of her existence, right? And which we know now, because again, there's so much work that's been done over the last 10, 15 years about sort of the gendered experience of migration for men and for women, and how this question of sex, sexual exploitation, sexual abuse, and prostitution are sort of much more kind of, I think, well-known, better understood aspects of this phenomena of migration. And of course, the truth, of course, is that it is simply not unique to a place like Arlit. I mean, in fact, when we think about the way that women get caught up in these migratory routes, in fact, a large percentage of women who actually make it to, places like Italy and Spain will end up getting funneled into sex work. And so that this is, I mean, I think it's actually a very important part of the film, even if actually unintentional at the moment that she makes that revelation about herself. So I think at this point, I want to just open it up to the audience for questions. and you can, you could, if you preferred, you could certainly type in a question into the chat, but also just raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask a question. I think that's maybe Jesse Shipley.
Hi, Karina. Yeah, can you see me?
Yeah.
Hiya. Hi, all. Thank you so much for this great conversation. I had a sort of follow-up question based on what you're saying, Karina, and the question about visual language that sort of, as I was, you know, in watching the film, I think the sort of visual language is really complicated and interesting. And I'm just curious, as a filmmaker, how your visual language, how you've thought through that based on your sort of answer to what Karina's talking about around the sort of subtle subtext that sometimes come out in the making of and then in the editing. I'm just wondering, you started out by talking about a little bit about trying to come up with a visual language as a filmmaker. And as someone who's also, I'm a filmmaker and a scholar, I struggle with trying to get across complicated ideas sometimes in the language of sort of visual representation. I'm just wondering how you watch this film now yourself and how your language might have evolved or changed or not over time, based on the political moment, the sort of visual moment and things like that, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much. Interesting question. I think something that I kept doing is that when you come to a location, it's very important to get to know the rhythm in the location, the rhythm of life, right? And in Arlit itself is a slow city. You know, you cannot make a film that's so quick like people would do it in another place of the world, right? So it's important for me when I first came in this location. It's how, what rhythm I can adopt, that work with a place, right? And in a place where nothing happens. There's nothing happening. There's no movement. People are waiting. They expensively just waiting. So how do you show waiting, right? So that's was my the first thing I have to decide. Is that how the camera position and also doing the editing. It's let me tell you the story. When I first came back with my material, I hired a editor. The editor did not understand, who never been in a place like like Arlit, don't know Africa, and it was used to edit this quick film interviews and then did this first editing. I said, no, that's not my film. That's not the film. So, and then we try, I say, at some point I say, we have to stop here. I don't think we are on the same level of understanding. I don't think we can work together because that's not the kind of film I would like to do. So I had to change the editor, right, to understand what I was trying to tell a story. That's this place, to have this, you can call it a slow editing if you want, but slow editing you can do it if you have a material that allows you to do the slow editing. Have this kind of material. I have a long take, for instance, right? And all of the picture you have seen, this in a landscape like for instance, I have a very long shot, which also with my second editor had been a discussion because it was there's nothing happened. And then I shot it like a 380-degree span where nothing had happened, where the editor say, you cannot edit this. So I say, yeah, that's the most important part of my film. We have to edit it. And it took us two days of discussion. Every day say, are you sure you want to use it? I say, yes, I'm very sure I want to use this. And we end up making, most of the people who have, not only those professional, but to get the sense of the place within this void. It's important to have this kind of shot, for instance, that tells story. That's for instance, one example of what you can say is a visual storytelling. To tell, to situate your audience, where we are. Right?
I just wanted to say quickly that like the opening scene is so amazing, because actually when you start the film, you wonder whether you actually started the film, because the bus that's coming towards the sign that welcomes people to Arlit doesn't appear to be moving. And so you sort of go back and you're like, wait, is this thing playing? And you realize it actually is, but there's just no movement until there is movement, but it doesn't actually register on the screen. It's not until you sit there and you're like, what's going on? Is this film not started yet? That you realize, no, indeed, the film has started, but it's just taking a really long time for this bus to visually have it resonate that it is actually moving, and it's a brilliant way of encapsulating what you just said right from the very beginning of the film.
Thanks.
Other questions? Yes, Chiamo? Let's see. Let me see if I can unmute you. There you go.
Thanks for everything so far. It's been really great. I learned a little bit about Agadez, and I was wondering why you chose Arlit as opposed to Agadez. And you mentioned that the uranium project is less financially successful than it used to be, and could you explain why?
Great, thank you. So, at the time we were shooting, there was a crisis, international crisis of uranium, in the market, the global market, which is not the case today. Uranium, the price went so up today, and even though there's no change regarding the number of people working in the mine, but the price of the kilo of uranium, the international market is so high today. So all this is dependent to the global conversation. Let's say global market, right? There was a time where people, the activists and entire nuclear, for instance, were saying that uranium, atom plant or nuclear plants are no longer welcome in the world, right? So that was the years 2000. So that was this time where really activists were very active against nuclear plants in the world, right? So which has drastically changed today. We're coming back. Coming back, where people say, even now, in Dubai, there was this gathering where people now are selling nuclear plant as the solution of this global warming, right? So that has changed everything. It's changing everything now, even the narrative in France that today, France that, from the narrative in 20 years ago, when they say we make no profit in Niger, now they become, even with all what the government in Niger is trying now to say, or France still want to stay. They want to stay there, right? So you can imagine So there's a big change. Back then, 20 years ago, there was a big problem. So there were only when we were there were only 1,500 workers, from 5 or 10,000, in the 80s. You can imagine, how. So regarding your question, Agadez is a different place. There's no uranium mines than in Agadez. Even we are in the same area, actually. Agadez is part of Arlit, even though the two cities are 200 kilometers apart, but it's the same culture, right? Culture area. That wasn't my setting. It was my setting because of these mines and because of the history of Arlit, a city that's been created from zero, just in the end of the 60s. Agadir is an old city. It's a very historically very important city, and interesting city too, but for other completely different stories. Yeah.
Yeah, just to build quickly on what Idrisu is saying. So, one of the interesting things now is that, like, right after the coup in Niger, just early in 2023, France was very quick to sort of say, we're still committed to to the uranium production there. And in fact, they effectively have agreed to, this is Oran, this company, right, that is based in France, to extending the life of the only sort of major mine that is still producing uranium in Niger by another 40 years. And as Idrisu said earlier, this kind of has been recast as kind of doing Niger a favor, right? Like, if we don't do this, without this, you don't have a major driver of your economy. But of course, behind that is something that I tried to allude to earlier in my opening remarks, which is that as the Ukrainian-Russian war has elevated the importance of sanction regimes, and as Russia is also a large producer of uranium, France has been put into a situation where they have to actively begin to diversify the places from which they can get uranium. And so again, there's this like return to Niger as a source. And it just shows you how alive those kind of neo-colonial relations remain today. And again, that infuses people's kind of the anti-colonial sentiment that comes through in popular support for the coup that just took place. So thank you for that question. Others? Tabitha.
Thank you so much for this, and I'm sorry to take advantage and leap in case anybody else wants to. Just raise your hand and I'll shut up. But I had this, I guess, as you were speaking, Idrisu, I was really interested in to what extent, and I don't know if this is an answerable question. Let me pull back a little bit. I read some of Gabriella Hecht's book on this subject of France's relationship to nuclear power. And one of the key kind of arguments in that work is that is about the nuclear exception, right? The idea that, unlike other forms of energy, people are sufficiently afraid of the possibility of nuclear crisis that you get a kind of resistance that you don't see for other forms of, or you hadn't seen for other forms of extraction. And part of her argument, though, is that the exception to the exception is mining. So while lots of fear of nuclear reactors and what might happen and protests against that by large publics, very little, in fact, and resistance on the part of the dangers, especially the health dangers of mining. So I wondered if the young men who were coming through Arlet now are increasingly aware of those dangers and how that has an impact on Arlet itself, but also on this migratory pattern that you've pointed out so thoroughly.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, for those who are just in transit, there's no, there's no danger, right? Or very few, you know. Most importantly, those who are in danger, those who live there, there are many generations now, around 4 generations of people living there, living in Arlit. And those people at some point will develop, kind of sickness. You can imagine it's not just of those who are workers, it's of the mind around the city. And we are in the middle of this, right? And there are a lot of wind, and this wind, I can tell you, you can make 10 films on alone on this city. I recorded garden, people who produce tomatoes, salad next to the mines. You can imagine those people, within 10, 15, or 20 years, they will develop a kind of cancer. Those who eat these tomatoes, salad, and so on. That's a kind of aspect, I didn't want to, it's when I say it's not an investigation, who is responsible for that, I decided not to go in this direction, even though I recorded this aspect of contamination. Otherwise, the film would have been a film around contamination, which wasn't my my intention. I want to make a film, show a situation that is more about this relationship, France-Niger relation. So this is and another aspect for instance, very young people are enrolled in the mines. Very young, I film a lot of saying, with young people walking, touching, even urinate with a radioactive, without any protection. I filmed them. So why they taking these young people? Because they know these people can, they will be healthy until their 50s, and then sickness will stop, after the 50s, and they will go maybe back home, like my characters, and then cancer will now come out and then kill them, right? So most of the people who live in Arlit, they will not be older than 60, 65 years old. As you can see, all the older people in my film, they all pass away. All. The only people you see who are still alive are the young, Amadou and all the young people. All older people all pass away. Just pass away 5 years, within 5 years after the shoot. Issa passed away, 5 years after the shoot. And all the older men you see in the film, within 5 years, they all died. They pass away. So you can imagine how many people are dying or already died in Arlit without anybody, talking about it. As I said, in France, would have been in France at this situation, there will be a lot of revolt. That happened also in Limousin. People started talking, and when I was still living in France in the year 2000, there were a kind of demonstration. That's something to come back to show you. It's about Africans. Mines are Africans, and a top plant is European. So just to show you how different our values, life values are. It's when contamination concerns Africans, it's not a topic for the people of the world. That's why we talk too much about atom plant, how dangerous atom plant is. It's as dangerous as the mine itself. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for that question, and also just in for the film and for this conversation with you and Karina that again opens up the possibility of really thinking about the interrelationship between and in ways that and probably many of us, I don't want to assume, didn't necessarily understand, right? The sort of the migrations, Algeria, Benin, and Niger in between uranium, nuclear energy, obviously, but what that relationship was and how it was connected, even briefly, to the coup d'etat, and possibly even giving us space to give some greater consideration to all of the coup d'etat that have overtaken the continent in the last several months, though technically we are finished at 2 p.m., so we won't have time to explore that any further right now. I do hope that those who are here will continue to reflect on this, and also that we with French Historical Studies and some of our, and of course Africa as a country, will be able to come together again to continue these conversations, because they're awfully important. And as you point out, most significantly, very few people really know what's happening. And there's nothing short of hundreds of thousands of lives, if not millions of lives, that are at stake. So I hope that we can continue this. Can I turn it over to you, Karina, for a last word, and then we will, Judy, our fearless leader, will end the call.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the note that I would want to end on is to really think about, like, so, Arlit II Paris, right? And, are we at a historical moment in which we're looking at the possibility of Arlit as the second Paris, right? Like, as Idrisu pointed out, the price of uranium has shot back up, as it is now sort of being heralded as an answer for our clean energy seeking world, right? And what does that mean for Arlit, and for we've got this extension now, a 40-year extension on this mine. What actually will happen? And it's interesting to think: is it possible that as connecting the story of migration, as folks are moving through Arlit, that some will begin to stay again, will get drawn back into mining? And even if that doesn't happen, what's at stake again for this population as the city may be renewed again because of the increase in price of uranium? So it just, again, to kind of echo something that Idrisu said at the very beginning, that on the one hand, he's glad that people are still watching this film, but it saddens him that it has just as much relevance today as it did, in 2005. And I think, that's really the very much the case here.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah.
I mean, this has just been one of the most interesting Sunday afternoons I've spent in a long time, and it's a very welcome distraction to think differently about what's going on in the world. So thank you so much, Karina, and thank you so much, Idrisu, for coming. Thank you, Tabitha, for pulling this together, and thank you, everyone in the audience. I put a note in about our next one of our next sessions, and follow the H France list is one of the best ways to get announcements about it. Thank you, everyone. Happy December.
Thank you so much.
It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you. Yes.
I hope you're teaching historians in your course, Idrisu. I was going to ask you about whether how many history students you had, as well as film students. But we are kind of out of time, so maybe I get to ask you that on another occasion.
We hope we'll come back and talk about Indochine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's
hopefully.
try and do Indochine.
Yeah.
I think that would be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really, that's a very important initiative. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tabitha.
We were honored.
Karina,
honored.
thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. Thank you for being here.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye, all.
Bye, all.